In 1941, a Harvard botanist entered the Amazon with one objective: document what the tribes were actually using and why. He expected to find accident, random discovery, people who had stumbled onto powerful plants without understanding what they were doing. He stayed for 14 years. When Richard Evans Schultes finally left the Amazon, he had documented over 2,000 plant species used with pharmacological precision that he could not fully explain. He had witnessed preparation methods so specific, so chemically exact, that replicating them in a laboratory required equipment the tribes did not have, and knowledge the tribes should not have possessed. And he had encountered repeatedly the same fact that would define his career and frustrate his attempts at complete explanation. Tribes separated by hundreds of kilometers of impenetrable jungle, with no contact with each other, had independently discovered the same plants, combined them the same way, and used them for the same purpose. He documented everything. He published extensively. The one thing he never published was a satisfactory explanation for how they knew. The tribes had an answer. They said the plants taught them. After 14 years in the Amazon, Schultes could not prove they were wrong. The assumption that psychoactive plant use in Amazon tribes is accidental, recreational, or the result of primitive experimentation is not just wrong. It is the opposite of what the evidence shows. What Schultes documented, and what every serious researcher who followed him has confirmed, is a system, precise, structured, pharmacologically sophisticated, that operates with the consistency of medicine and the depth of science, developed entirely outside the framework of either. The Shipibo-Conibo people of the Ucayali River Basin in Peru distinguish between at least 14 distinct categories of plant-based ceremonial preparation. Each is used for a specific purpose. Each requires a different preparatory protocol. Each is accessible only through a specialist whose training spans years of apprenticeship before they are permitted to administer that preparation independently. The idea that this represents a culture accidentally getting high, roughly equivalent to describing a hospital as a building where people accidentally get better. The question Schultes spent 14 years trying to answer: how did they know which plants to combine, in which proportions, prepared in which specific way, out of 40,000 species, is the same question that has driven every serious researcher into this field since. The answer the tribes give has never changed, and the evidence accumulated over 80 years of research has not produced a better one. The preparation of ayahuasca begins long before the ceremony. It begins with the diet. Among the Shipibo-Conibo, the preparatory protocol for a serious ayahuasca ceremony requires the participating shaman to follow strict dietary and behavioral restrictions lasting a minimum of several days, and in major ceremonies extending to weeks. No salt, no sugar, no alcohol, no sexual activity, no pork, no cold water. Minimal social interaction. The diet during this period consists primarily of plantain, river fish prepared without seasoning, and water. Schultes documented these restrictions during his first years in the Amazon and noted their consistency across communities. He could not initially explain them. The explanation came decades later, when Western pharmacology had developed sufficient understanding of the brew's active compounds to recognize what the restrictions were actually doing. The vine component of ayahuasca, Banisteriopsis caapi, contains beta-carboline compounds that function as monoamine oxidase inhibitors. MRO inhibitors interact dangerously with tyramine, a compound found in aged foods, alcohol, cured meats, and foods prepared with stored salt. The dietary restrictions the Shipibo-Kanibo had maintained for generations without any knowledge of monoamine oxidase inhibitors are, in pharmacological terms, a precise contraindication protocol for MAO inhibitor use. They did not derive this from biochemistry. They derived it from watching what happened to people who did not follow the restrictions and refining the protocol across generations until what remained was only what kept people safe. The ceremony itself is conducted at night. This is consistent across virtually every ayahuasca-using community in the anthropological literature. And it is not arbitrary. Darkness eliminates visual input that would compete with or distort the visionary experience. The shaman's icaros, the specific songs sung throughout the ceremony, function as navigational tools within the altered state, providing an auditory anchor that participants use to orient themselves during experiences that can be profoundly disorienting. Researchers studying the neurological effects of ayahuasca using functional MRI have found that the default mode network, the brain system associated with self-referential thought and the sense of a stable, continuous self, shows significant disruption during the experience. The icaros, from a neurological standpoint, provide external structure during a period when internal structure has been temporarily dissolved. The shaman is not performing theater. He is doing what any competent medical professional does during a procedure that affects a patient's consciousness, maintaining continuous monitoring, providing guidance, and intervening when the experience moves in a direction that requires redirection. What participants report seeing has been documented across hundreds of accounts collected by researchers, including anthropologist Luis Eduardo Luna, whose work cataloging visionary content across multiple Amazon communities identified recurring elements appearing across participants with no contact with each other and no shared cultural framework. Geometric patterns of specific types, encounters with entities described in similar terms across completely different communities, experiences of death and rebirth reported with enough structural consistency to constitute a documented phenomenology. Science does not yet have a complete explanation for why the visionary content shows cross-cultural consistency. It remains one of the genuinely open questions in consciousness research. Schultes noted it in his fieldwork journals in the 1940s. It has not been resolved since. The independent discovery problem is what Schultes called the central mystery of Amazon pharmacology, and it has never been solved. Communities separated by hundreds of kilometers of impassable terrain, with no documented history of contact, with languages that share no common root, developed preparation methods for psychoactive plants that show structural similarities exceeding what chance would predict. The combination of a MAO inhibitor with a DMT source, the pharmacological core of ayahuasca, requires knowledge of a biochemical interaction that Western science did not formally describe until the 20th century. Multiple Amazon communities possess that knowledge independently. Schultes proposed two possible explanations in his later writings. The first was an undocumented period of contact between communities, trade routes, or migration patterns that the historical record does not capture, but that allowed knowledge to transfer across geographic boundaries. The second was what he described with characteristic academic caution as plant-guided discovery, the possibility that consuming these plants in preliminary, lower-dose form produced experiential direction toward the combinations that generated the most significant effects. The tribes consider the second explanation self-evident. The plants, they say, communicate. not metaphorically, literally. During the altered state, information about preparation, combination, and use is transmitted directly. Schultes documented this claim across dozens of communities. He never found evidence to confirm it by the standards of Western science. He also never found evidence to rule it out. Sacred tobacco occupies a different position in Amazon spiritual pharmacology, but its role is equally documented and equally misunderstood. Among the Yanomami, the word for tobacco shares its linguistic root with words meaning breath, spirit, and the animating force that distinguishes living beings from objects. Tobacco smoke in Yanomami ceremonial practice opens communication with the Hekura, the spirits that shamans work with during healing ceremonies. Its administration follows protocols as specific as those governing ayahuasca use among the Shipibo Konibo. The pharmacological basis is not difficult to identify. Nicotiana rustica, the species used ceremonially across Amazon communities, contains nicotine concentrations several times higher than commercial tobacco. At high doses, administered rapidly through concentrated preparations insufflated directly into the nasal passage, it produces altered states of consciousness that Yanomami shamans describe as essential for the perceptual shift required to perceive and interact with the spirit world. Whether what they perceive in that state exists outside their own neurology is a question science cannot currently answer in either direction. What science can answer is that the state is real, the pharmacology is real, and the protocol the Yanomami use to produce it safely has maintained consistency across generations with an effectiveness that the absence of documented mass casualties from its use confirms. Schultes returned from the Amazon in 1954 and spent the remainder of his career at Harvard attempting to communicate what he had found to a scientific community that was not ready to receive it. The plants he documented became the foundation of ethnobotany as a formal discipline. The preparation methods he recorded became the basis for pharmaceutical research that continues today. The question he could not answer, how they knew, became the question that defined the field he created. 60 years after Schultes left the Amazon, researchers at Johns Hopkins University, Imperial College London, and the Beckley Foundation began publishing clinical trial results using purified compounds derived from the same plants he had documented. The results showed significant therapeutic effects on treatment-resistant depression, post-traumatic stress disorder, and end-of-life anxiety in terminal patients. The therapeutic mechanism appeared to involve temporary dissolution of rigid thought patterns encoded in the default mode network, followed by a reorganization period during which new patterns of thought and self-perception became accessible. Amazon shamans had been producing this reorganization deliberately in people who needed it for thousands of years. They did not call it neuroplasticity. They called it healing. The outcome, measured by the same criteria modern clinical research uses, was the same. The protocols they developed to produce that outcome safely map with remarkable precision onto the safety and integration protocols that contemporary clinical researchers developed independently through controlled trials. The dietary restrictions, the ceremonial structure, the continuous monitoring, the specific techniques used to navigate difficult experiential content, the integration period following the ceremony, every element that modern psychedelic-assisted therapy has arrived at through rigorous clinical investigation, Amazon tribes arrived at through generational observation and refinement of what kept people safe and produced lasting benefit. The Amazon got there first, by thousands of years. What Schultes understood by the end of 14 years in the jungle was that the framework he had brought with him, the framework that divided the world into the scientifically sophisticated and the primitively ignorant, did not survive contact with what he found there. The communities he had entered, expecting to document accident and superstition, had built something that his own institution, with all of its resources and all of its methodological rigor, was only beginning to approach. He spent the rest of his life trying to protect what they had built from the forces that were destroying it. The logging, the mining, the missionary activity that systematically dismantled the ceremonial structures through which this knowledge was transmitted. He understood that what was being lost was not culture in the decorative sense. It was knowledge, specific, irreplaceable, pharmacologically precise knowledge about consciousness and healing that had taken thousands of years to develop and couldn't be reconstructed from the outside once the communities that held it were gone. Some of it is already gone. The communities that held specific preparation methods, specific ceremonial protocols, specific botanical knowledge that Schultes documented in the 1940s no longer exist in the form he encountered them. The knowledge he recorded in his field journals is, in some cases, the only remaining record of practices that were refined across hundreds of generations. The plants are still in the jungle. The knowledge of what to do with them is disappearing faster than anyone is moving to preserve it.